So thank you everybody for attending today. My name is Jacob Martinez. I run theactmatrix.com and do a lot of work with the Act Matrix. And so does Lior. And Lior and I recently did a interview together for YouTube or my newsletter. And we decided to do this little Q&A because we thought it would be helpful. So the agenda for today is we're going to be getting questions from those of you who are live in the audience. We also have a set of questions that people submitted offline, people that couldn't attend or people that submitted questions in advance. And so it may have been some of you that had submitted those questions. If so, you can either ask it live or you can just say, I submitted a question and it was the one about this or whatever. But Lior, if you want to introduce yourself, go ahead.
My name is Lior Biran. I'm a clinical psychologist here in Israel, and I'm also very much into the Matrix. And it's very exciting for me to be here and like host this thing with you, Jacob, because I read a lot of your stuff and saw a lot of your demonstrations. So it's nice to do this thing with you.
Thank you. And of course, you can ask questions in the chat as well. And also, if you're using your voice to speak, you can ask a question either in English or in Hebrew. And it should work out just fine. Okay. Well, why don't we start with maybe taking any live questions that participants have here. We have a couple of questions that we sorted out already, and we can reference those as well. But what are some of the things that you're interested in knowing, or what kind of questions do you have about using the ACT matrix or ACT in general that have been on your mind? Does anybody have one that we can kind of get started with?
I have to admit, in order to relieve myself from having any specific question, I took the ACT matrix that Lior has developed in Hebrew, and it was very beneficial to my work. But I have to admit that I'm not using the diagram, or I'm not using the matrix as a tool. I felt that it really integrates with the thought processing during encounter I have with the people that are requesting help with any issue or suffering they coming and expose myself and meet. So I don't have any specific question. I wanted to be here to see what is the experience of other therapists. What are the difficulties either using the matrix as it originally developed, or any aspect that it enhanced. So I hope it's okay with you.
I have something concrete to ask, like a small question.
Sure.
Okay? I think what I asked in the form was more general and smart question, but what happened to me today is that I kind of got into not exactly an argument, but when I was trying to sort, it was actually. It wasn't in a meeting because it's a client. We were talking about the metrics, and we did it a long time ago, and we are coming back all the time. And now we were talking about something she's going to do, and then she wrote me, "I don't want to do it," and she asked me what I think about it, and then I wrote her, "Let's see if to do it is more on the right or more on the left, and then you can see or decide or choose." And we got a little mixed up we didn't agree if it's on the right or the aspect of looking at it. Okay, there was the action itself, and you can say it's something on the right because it's going towards something that's important to her, or that she's avoiding something. But then she said, but if my will is to avoid, then we got kind of mixed up in the deciding where to put it exactly. So I would like to hear what you say about that.
Lior, do you want to go first, or do you want to? We're not hearing your audio, Lior.
Yeah, I muted it. Sorry. I just want to say to delete that I also not using the matrix all of the time, or I use it as a conceptualizing like a mechanism with myself. And some of the time I'm using the matrix with my clients, but it's not like doing it over and over again all of the time. So I confess as well, like you maybe. And Orla, I maybe Jacob, you have
Sure.
something more to say, but I want to say to you that the question regarding towards and away or right or left, it's not it is not like a dichotomous or binary, like or. Everything can be, you know, part of it is to the right, part of it is to the left, and what is meaningful, I think, in the dialogue is to observe and try and see what is the function of my behavior. And when the client starts to ask this question, it is a step forward, then be like a passive agent in the world, in his world.
Yes. So when it comes to trying to kind of figure out which box does this fit into, or the right or the left, toward or away, a lot of times we can get hung up on, you know, which one is it, and it can always be both. We can be moving towards something, or in other words, like if you think about a rabbit, the rabbit can be moving away from the dog and towards the carrot at the same time. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And so the way that we can work with clients and sort of splitting that out is like, as your client was saying, it's a toward move topographically, or like, you know, visually, it's a toward move. But if my will on the inside is to avoid, then what is it, right? And so here we might say, you know, what parts of this are a toward move, what parts of this are an away move, or we can say something like, or we can ask something like, in what way is this moving you toward what you want, and in what way is this moving you away from some of that experience? Or we can split it out and we can think, if she's noticing that this is visually a toward move, this is something I do that is supposed to connect me, but on the inside I'm avoiding, then we might think like, you know, my body is engaging in a toward move, but my mind is still avoiding, and there's something happening internally for me that is the away move. This is actually part of the reason why a lot of us have stopped using toward and away, because it can get so confusing. So myself, when I do the matrix after the first session, I start, instead of using toward and away, we use survival and vitality. And Kevin Polk, one of the creators of the matrix, also doesn't use toward and away anymore. He uses satisfaction and relief. So that then it becomes much easier, you know, which part of this action is providing satisfaction, which part of this is for relief. As you're moving, you know, instead of toward, it would be, is this something that's adding vitality to your life? Or is this something you're doing just to survive, like a survival move? And I think Lior experiments with that as well, using survival and vital on occasion.
Yeah. No, I use it like you all the time, not on occasion. Survival and vitality. I think it's much better than toward and away, and I think it really shows us that the behavioral field is not like ABC, antecedent behavior consequences. It's much more complex than this because of language, because of verbal behavior. So I think, Orna, that your confusion is a door into the complexity of human behavior. It's not like a rabbit that she has very clear cut, or as Jacob said, she might also run away from the dog and find carrots, but the cut is much more clear than in human beings, verbal human beings, and that the behavioral field or unit of analysis is much more complex, I think, than looking at it as one consequence, like away from something or toward something. Layered.
I think too, in the Essential Guide to the Act Matrix book, they use an example of a person who is calling his children, his adult children, to check in on them, and he's doing it obsessively. He's always worried that something is happened to his children, so he's constantly calling them to check in to see if they're okay. And then eventually gets to the point where he's simply calling them just to talk and have a conversation. So it's visually, it's the same action, but internally it's a much different experience for that person. And so one of those, that first one, they would consider to be an away move. I'm calling just to get the feeling of fear, or the feeling of, something's happening to my kids. I'm calling to extinguish that feeling, or to get away from that feeling. And then in the second example, I'm calling to actually move toward or connect to some other experience.
So I think what we are, to sum up, I think that we talk about two main themes. One is the difference between topography and function. Like, things can see the same, but function differently. And the complexity of every human behavior.
Yes, perfectly said. Thank you, Lior.
Thank you, Arna. So you see, it wasn't like a little technical question. Yeah, Yal, you want to say something? You raise your hand, but you're muted. You're muted.
Well, for me, what helped me in the matrix is to ask myself about the discrepancy, or the gap between the values and how one is living. And when I find the mismatch between the two parts, I wonder what is the best process to begin to investigate it, and to clarify what's going on. It is very easy to find mismatch, but it is more difficult to find the reason or what's going on. Sometimes the answer is not so clear. For example, I have a patient who has really got to the conclusion that his marriage is about to end. He doesn't want to get old with his wife, but from some reason he can't think about the way or to be more active in doing something. He's paralyzed. And of course, I think that we have to see, and we know already the values that are in such big mismatch, that this is why he wants to change his life, but he's paralyzed. And so I'm asking, what you recommend, though, about the process, how to investigate when you find out the mismatch?
Lior, what do you think?
I think about the function of investigating. Yeah, this is what comes up to my mind, because why do you want to investigate? I think that one function can be in order to find a solution to this problem. And I think this is like a slippery slope for us ACT therapists, because it might take us very easily or quickly into problem solving mode, and like us as therapists doing a bit of a way move. So I would investigate with myself firstly, what is the function of investigating? And I want the function of investigating be maximizing their behavioral repertoire of this guy that you're talking about. So values and the discrepancy between values and living and the reason for getting stuck, I think they are all like opportunities for us to try and expand behavioral repertoire. Like, how can he move differently in the world, and what can he learn from this varying his behavior? Yeah, I hope I'm understood. I'm not sure.
It is always good to enlarge your repertoire of behaviors, of course. But I think that as a therapist, I'd like to find out the reasons, what's going on in his mind, what's going on there. I want to understand it. I want to see the process. I want that we both can understand it together. And I think if we'll do so, eventually it will get us to more possibilities or enlarge the repertoire of behaving.
Yeah, so I think this concerns like the vehicle of change. Is it insight oriented, like me understanding what's holding me back? Or is it like me behaving differently gives me connection to the consequences of my behavior, and then a change can come gradually. So I'm not looking for explanations, but this is, I think, me. No, it's not like.
Yeah, let me go in. I'm going to come down in the middle between both of what you're saying. So I think what we sometimes can get caught up in as therapists is we're looking at these sort of outward changes, and we can get really kind of caught up with that horizontal line of the matrix is what is the behavior, and what does it look like, and what is it doing? And so the vertical line of the matrix is that distinction between the inner world and that inner experience and outer experience. And so I do think that when clients sort of get the horizontal line, in other words, they have a conceptual, like a cognitive understanding of, I know what I should be doing. I know that doing this would be the thing that I want to do, yet I still find myself stuck. I just can't, I don't know why I can't make the change. What that indicates to me is they have a clear understanding of that horizontal line. In other words, the difference between a valued action or vital action and a survival move or an away move. And so our job then is to increase understanding of that vertical line. What is going on internally, not just what's going on externally. So I have a write-up on my blog or on the actmatrix.com about the vertical line. I'm going to put it in the chat, but if I can share my screen really quickly. This is an image from that post that I'm referencing. Sometimes I play around with just where do we put the horizontal line? And for some clients, they look conceptualizing their behavior, their life sort of looks like this. They have a lot of behaviors. They have a lot of away moves, a lot of toward moves, but their awareness of what's going on internally is kind of shallow. And so they can kind of access just a few thoughts and feelings, or they can name just a few thoughts and feelings about what's going on internally for them. They might have a lot of trouble using different words to describe their experience. For example, you might see clients that no matter what's going on, they're always stressed. Like the word stress is the word that they use. And they don't have like a large vocabulary, or they might be always angry. And so that's like the main emotion that they're labeling, but they're not really labeling anything else. And so what we want to do with that vertical line is we want to try to increase some of that awareness, because for other clients, they might look like this, where they're all inner stuff. They have like a deep understanding of what's going on internally. They're constantly in their thoughts and in their feelings, but then their behavior is very shallow. They're only doing a couple of things externally, like their behavioral repertoire externally is narrowed. And so both of these are problematic in their own way. And so the matrix then, if you think about that center point being the self as kind of a buoy, or like a thing that floats between outer experiencing and inner experiencing, the goal for me for the matrix is when we do it enough, it becomes kind of more balanced in the center. So like the way that you traditionally look at the matrix, which is the horizontal line is in the middle, where they have a good understanding of what's going on internally. Then they also have a good wide or expanded set of behaviors externally. And then there's some balance there between the two. And so I think, Eyal, when you're asking, about that awareness about why is something occurring, for me, I'm in between the two of you. So I don't necessarily need to know why something's occurring, but I do want clients to become aware of what is occurring. So when I have a gap between my values and my actions, I do want to become aware of what is sort of the thing that is governing my behavior in those moments. And I don't necessarily need to trace it back all the way to where it comes from or anything like that, but I do want to build some awareness there so that we can kind of mentally tag it or note it. Oh, this is one of those moments like, oh, I'm being caught up with this internally for me. So that's where I come down on this issue.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think that maybe I don't agree completely, because I want to emphasize something that looking like changing the balance between the upper end of the matrix and the lower side of the matrix, it's like moving something in the orientation of the client. Yeah, maybe he's more focused on the outside world, and you want to help him get more focus on his inner world. So you are like developing his function of orienting his attention, yeah, to a different place. And I want to emphasize that I think that the function of this is not to understand better or to know the reasons, yeah, but to move his behavior differently than the way that he's stuck in. Like maybe he's stuck in orienting out towards the outer world, and I want to help him orient it differently, and then also, as you said, develop this middle circle of the self perspective.
I think what you're saying, Lior, is that attention is behavior. Is that what?
Yeah.
Okay.
The orienting attention is behavior. Yeah. Okay, Yali, it answers the question. Yeah.
We have something in the chat. Many times patients fused with toward and away moves equals good and bad, respectively. How do you reply in the room to this behavior? It's a good question. You're right. Not only do patients sometimes get confused. And they think toward and away are good and bad. Therapists get confused all the time. And we end up using the matrix as if toward is good and away is bad. I see it happen with clinicians all the time. That's part of the reason why Kevin Polk and me separately, both, you know, on our own, switched and we stopped using toward and away. So I think part of that in the beginning, when I set up the matrix for the first time, I try to minimize that. And I have that script that I use, which is on my website. And the script is, when we use the rabbit metaphor to set up the matrix, I make it very clear that that a rabbit can go away from the dog and towards the carrot at the same time. So it's not one or the other. I also make it clear that what would happen to a rabbit that only ever moved away from dogs, but it never moved towards carrots. And then I say, what would happen to a rabbit that only ever moved towards carrots, but it never moved away from dogs? See, both of those consequences could be problematic. And then I also explicitly say in the very beginning when I set up the matrix that we're using the words toward and away. We're not using good or bad, right or wrong, true or false. This is something different for those reasons that it can be both, where it's hard for something to be true and false at the same time. But it's much easier for something to be moving away and toward at the same time. The difficulty comes from there's not in the physical world, it is hard to be moving toward and away from something at the same time, right? If I'm moving toward my house, it's hard for me to be moving away from my house at the same time. And so physically, all of our examples of that, they don't really compute. So that's why I sort of as quickly as I can switch it to survival and vitality, that we can do things for reasons of survival, or we can do things for reasons of vitality. And sometimes it's the same action. Sometimes it's something that does both, which is great. It doesn't have to be one or the other. But I guess to concretely answer your question, in the room, if a client's saying, is this good, or is this good that I'm doing this, or is this bad that I'm doing this? I would say something like, well, if you remember our rabbit that we used in the very beginning, a rabbit can move away from a dog and towards a carrot. So neither of those is good or bad. It's what you sort of are doing in the context of that moment. So what we're more concerned about is in the context here, how is this functioning for you? Is this moving you towards something that matters to you? Or is this helping you move away from something that's uncomfortable to feel internally? You know, what do you think? So I would just try to reframe it that way.
And I think that workability also comes in mind here. Like left or right, it's not good or bad, but is it workable for you to survive or to be more vital?
I think sometimes, oh, he said thanks. I think sometimes I find it complicated when people have too many or a lot of things that are important to them and they want to go toward them, but they can't do that in the same time. So they have to choose, and then they choose a toward move, but it makes pain because they can't choose the other one, which is also important. So while they're going toward something that is important, they're going more far or more away from something else that is still important. And this is where I can get confused or complicated, and I think actually the metrics should help me navigate through this. But sometimes I get it gets complicated. So can I give an example? Okay, so a person who I work in a heart rehabilitation for people from who went through heart attack, and they have to decide to change things in their life. So I have now a client who is working as a pizza. He owns a pizza place, and he wants to reconstruct there and to invest a lot of money. On the same time, he wants to להוריד הילוך, to
slow down.
Yes, slow down, to not to be so involved in the business because of his health. So it's and when he's going and toward the reconstructions and planning it, so he gets more anxious, and then he thinks, and then he has this pain in in the chest, and he goes to medical checks to see if something is wrong, and he really doesn't know what's the best to take down, to take a step down from the business, or to take a step up, and he's getting confused with it, and I want to help him with the metrics, and well, and this is my question.
Did you try the metrics with him, or is it like?
Yeah, I tried to at the beginning of the therapy to present the metric as a concept, and I would like to use it now with this specific issue.
Yeah, I have something here, and it's going to sound like we're sort of suggesting the same thing over and over, but I promise that that's not what we're trying to do here. This is exactly kind of where that toward and away starts to break down a little bit. And if we switch it to one of these other versions, like mine is survival and vitality, or Kevin Polk's is satisfaction or relief, I prefer mine. But if we think about owning a business and running a business, obviously that's very painful. There's lots of painful moments inside of that experience. And he can start to track that when he's running the business, he can start to kind of do things very fast. Like he's almost obsessively trying to make the business work and trying to get all this and trying to do the accounting, trying to do this. And when he's in that sort of mode of, I have to do this business and I have to take care of this, I have to take care of that, that experience in the moment for him probably doesn't feel very vital. It's probably more like he's sort of in survival mode when he's doing that. And so he could start to track that of like, oh geez, I love my business. It's the thing that I want in my life. I want to move toward it, but also when I get caught up in it, then it's totally consuming me. And then I feel like I'm just trying to survive, just trying to get over the hill to the other side. And then there's other times in his business where he might feel that pure sense of vitality, where he's doing the business, he's connecting with his employees or whatever, and he feels that overwhelming sense of connecting with his values. And those are two very different experiences. And if you can start to track that and kind of what is happening when, and what part of the, like the environment, the context is he more likely to experience each one of those, then he can start to maybe more creatively think of some solutions to to that problem, right? Where just as an example, I've seen many business owners who, when they have to do the accounting or something like that, they get very stressed, and then it's like pure survival mode. Well, then the solution to that is you have to hire somebody to do that so that you can focus on the things that you actually do care about, right? It's that little slice of the business that is producing a lot of those survival functions, and you're feeling so overwhelmed. You can get help just in that one area. You don't have to get help across the entire area of, this is my business, I have to own it. Nobody else has to take that away from you, but you can kind of get support in these other areas of your life that would make the whole experience much different for you. So trying to kind of track that, I think, could be helpful for this person, versus just doing toward and away, because then you're in that spot of, well, am I moving away from these values and toward these values? It's too confusing there. Is that helpful, Elad?
Yeah, I think so. It is too confusing, the towards and away. We have to we have to take it off our mind somehow. But thank you.
It's a bit too simplistic, I think, the towards and away. So
Yeah.
I think what Jacob suggests with the vitality and survival brings more complexity into it, and less binary thinking, or either or.
I think in this situation, sometimes you have to switch your decisions. For instance, he decided to take on this reconstructing because it's really important to him, and he knew that he's gonna stress himself out, and it's gonna be difficult. But when it became difficult, he became so anxious. Then he thought maybe it's not. Maybe he can change his mind, and it's okay. It's okay to say, okay, this is too much for me. Although it was a toward move, and he was there making this decision mindfully, but he can still decide to switch. But it's very painful. So this is the complexity that when defining this as a toward move, it's really hard. It's really hard to deliver that you can change your mind and it's still okay. It's still a toward move to change your mind and decide the opposite. Yeah. So this is what I'm taking, and to go to the vital and survival mode would help.
We are looking for behavioral flexibility, one. And secondly, I think that what Jacob was saying is that sometimes what seems as a toward move is basically a survival move, that he got stuck in and or hooked in something that wasn't working very well for him. Okay. Some more questions, or?
Let's pull one from the list.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a common question, I think a couple of people asked it, which is, after a while, I'm reading it here, after a while, the client's interest in the matrix starts to fade, and I feel repetitive referring to it. How do you keep it alive and continue to develop it over sessions? And this is, I think, a common one. I feel sometimes the same way, where I can start to worry, like, am I just doing the same thing over and over, with these clients? There's a couple of different ways of looking at this. First is, suppose you see a client once a week. Even if you are doing the matrix every single session, they are only seeing it once a week, right? Which is not a crazy amount of times to be exposed to something. If they're doing it every day at home, maybe. But I also think that if you're doing the matrix like exactly the same way each time, in other words, you're using the same questions, who and what is important to you, what shows up to get in the way, and you're just setting it up like the way you set it up the first time, then yeah, it's going to start to feel a little bit stale, because I think the matrix has to be sort of evolve a little bit with what the client is going through. And so there's lots of different ways that you can alter some of those questions that you're asking, or use the matrix more like the way Kevin Polk uses it. And I think Lior sometimes does it this way too, which is once you set it up, then it's sort of floating in the background, and you can kind of call attention to it without, let's draw it out again, and let's go through the 4 boxes every single time. It's more just like we were talking about with Elad, when a client is discussing something, then we might say, do you notice when you're doing that, do you feel like you're trying to survive? Do you feel like you're just, spinning a wheel, trying to get through? Or does it feel more like you're vitally connected to something that really matters to you? Or we might say, if as a client is speaking, like Eyal was referring to, we might say, as you're sitting there kind of stuck, struggling with this, tell me what's going on inside in that moment. I want to get a better picture of what you can kind of notice happening internally in your mind and in your feelings or your emotions. So we're just trying to call the client's attention. And if we think about what was it Dalit was saying, which is, attention is behavior, or orienting our attention is behavior. So as a client is going through the session, all we're doing is we're helping the client sort of orient their attention to different areas, which we on our end, we're kind of thinking of it through the matrix. So I'm helping a client orient their attention to the outer world, helping them orient to the inner world, helping them orient towards the function of what's happening. And I don't need to do that by sitting down and drawing the matrix and going, all the way through it every single time.
Yeah, this question was the most common one I think in the questions that we got in through the form. And I also want to say that repetitive vis-a-vis bad or good. Repetitive is not bad, yeah. If I'm repetitive with something, I think it's like multiple exemplar training. I do it again, and my client is like learning more and more and more. It's like learning is a repetitive process. Yeah, we do it again.
But sometimes, Lior, I meet a lot of patients that they lack of self-compassion, and when you don't have this self-compassion competency, paying attention to something that is hurt, that it's painful, it's a hard task to do.
So no, Dalit, I think it's a different issue. Whether you invite a client to orient towards what's painful for him or her, it's another question. I think we can address it as well. Than the repetitive nature of the boring stuff of the matrix, doing it again, and it's like become boring and useless. Yeah, I think if we keep using it for the purpose of paying attention, noticing, like a bit like mindfulness, yeah, learning to notice and orient my attention, then it can remain vital. For sure, if I do it do it again in the same manner, it will be boring. But as Jacob says, I can refer to it. I can take a specific event and try to put it on the matrix. It doesn't mean the repetitive nature doesn't mean that I have to do it the same manner every session.
And so Dalit, when you're saying that kind of clients who lack those self-compassion skills, which is very common, right? Many clients struggle with that I think part of way of even working with something like that is a lot of times when we speak maybe as therapists, we start to almost reduce behaviors down to something like very simple, as if a behavior is just one thing, right? But even that idea of trying to look at something that is painful, that's not just one behavior. There's 100 different behaviors wrapped into that, right? And so we're trying to kind of spread those out, and then we can sort some of those behaviors into the matrix, right? Especially if we're doing a survival vital one, which is, you know, you can do it in many different levels, but even on the topmost level, which is when somebody asks you to attend or to focus on something that hurts you, what do you notice showing up in your mind, right? And in there, they might say, oh, no, I don't want to do this. My mind is saying, this is, I can't look at that, right? And that's sort of a thought or a thinking process, which can sort onto the matrix. Is that thought, what is that thought helping you do? Is it trying to help you survive in that moment, right? So that thought might be a survival process. And then there's so much more of our experience that we're just trying to kind of peel it apart. And that's what I'm sorting into the matrix when I'm doing it. I'm not just saying, hey, this thing that hurts you, I want you to look right at it for exposure reasons. That would be inelegant, an inelegant way of doing exposure, because it's going to flood the person, and it's going to be overwhelming. So we want to try to kind of dance around with it and do it very delicately.
Jacob, there is a question in the chat. Maybe you have an answer for it. Do you have experience working with the matrix in cases of PTSD, especially when there are nightmares and disturbed sleep?
Wow, I joined the question. What a great question.
So part of this, just to set up some information, that the ACT matrix, its original purpose, the very first version of the ACT matrix ever, was designed for people with PTSD. So the matrix from the very beginning was designed for PTSD work, and it was designed specifically for people in the military who had experienced trauma. So that was the very first use case of the matrix. So it does have a large kind of trauma background. Personally, on my end, I don't have too much experience working with clients who have nightmares and disturbed sleep. But I imagine that, it's hard to sort of target those directly, right? Because I have worked with clients who, even they're asleep and they have a panic attack, even at night, they'll wake up and their heart is racing, 150 beats per minute, and they're sweating and they're inside of a panic attack, even in that moment. And nothing happened, they were asleep a second ago. And so these kinds of presentations are really hard, because what we would normally want to do is think, okay, what were you doing just before this happened? Trying to piece together the sequence of events that occurred. So I imagine that when we work with these kinds of clients, when we start doing some of these processes of building awareness of different pieces of the experience and acceptance, to like all the traditional ACT skills, that over time, some of those nightmares and disturbed sleep start to lessen or to reduce in frequency, sort of on their own. But I don't have any specific context for that. Lior, what about you?
I'm not working with the PTSD per se also, so I don't have experience with this kind of clients with nightmares and disturbed sleep. But I do have some experience with working with the matrix with the complex trauma clients. Like women, mostly women that were abused repeatedly as child, and a lot of their behavior today is like hooked into their past, yeah. And I think that the matrix, it's not specifically for this question, because I'm not sure it's like it's very similar to PTSD that you're asking about, Nikki. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that for them, looking through the matrix on their behaviors, it's like really opens up another perspective or another point of view, looking into into the way that they are hooked in past experience and memories. And then maybe when I can look at it, as we said earlier, the perspective and the orienting, when we notice it, look at it, so something opens up and I get less hooked and more free to move, surviving or survival of vitality, more free to choose between my behaviors.
Another thing that comes to mind for me is even just that idea of compassion and working with PTSD. Is there's so much of it that is sort of wrapped up in bodily processes that are natural, very normal, and so when our body is kind of doing something that it's designed to do, especially when it's experienced something that is very abnormal. Part of using the matrix helps clients understand, like, okay, it's not, we can move clients from a place of like, why is this happening to me? What's going on? To a more place of some understanding of, okay, this is sort of a natural process that's occurring, even though it's extremely uncomfortable, right? And a lot of the ways that I do that is thinking about even the process of dreaming or the process of remembering content or having ruminations about things. How did we get the ability to do that? It evolved over time. That perhaps, creatures who have the ability to, organisms that have the ability to think and to kind of experience something almost in picture perfect detail, they would have a much higher likelihood of survival than organisms that can't imagine scenarios in that way. And so it's that same process that helped us survive eons ago, which is now producing this very unfortunate effect here. It's the thing that used to help us a long time ago that is now hurting us. But it's the same thing that it's trying to help you survive. It's trying to help you survive something that you've already survived. You've already experienced it. And so when we use the matrix a little bit with this survival vitality framework, clients start to kind of get a little bit of that. And then therefore, when my own mind is doing something that is very unpleasant, I can look at it through this lens of, oh, this is not just happening to me for no reason. It's not just a thing that's occurring. It's occurring in this context of my life. And that context makes sense given what I've experienced, even though what I experienced was, nobody should have experienced that. And so there's some comfort there, at least on my end, when I think about my own experiences that have been hard in my life, and I start to apply some of that framework to that lens, I feel comforted, and it's not impacted. Those experiences don't impact me as much, and they don't influence my behavior nearly as much either.
Yeah, I think the matrix is a very, very good tool for validation and normalizing things and looking at stuff not from a judgmental point of view, but from the way it is, given my history, given my context in life, given where I grew up. This is another reason to get away from good or bad. It's just looking at behavior and noticing it and seeing it as it is, not as it says it is, if you refer to the act question. But Nikki, I think that you want to unmute yourself maybe and say something.
So I asked the question because I think almost by definition, often PTSD people, and it might not be so different with PTSD. I have a new patient who I've just seen once, but he fell 2.5 floors just 2 years ago, and he's just flooded with that memory of falling. And I think he's in survival state all the time, and to kind of think how he can move out of that. And as I say, he also doesn't sleep. So with the chronic non-sleep, it's very hard to think how vitality can ever have a part in that. And obviously it impacts all areas of his life. So that's where I was coming from. And I'm familiar with that with other patients as well.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there for sure. And part of this, I think what part of what I was trying to say is that survival mode is natural. It's normal. It's what we expect to happen, right? In certain situations sometimes. And so part of this is we can feel that survival mode, or when we're having some of these memories that they're so aversive to us that we're trying not to have them, right? We're trying to push them away. And what we almost want to do is get comfortable with that experience of maybe expecting that my mind is going to give me some of these things from time to time, understanding that it's just a cognitive experience, right? It's part of my own survival functions. It's part of my own experience, and it's not something I have to be afraid of. And then also, I think, this is where you would want to include other techniques, right? So when we're talking about the matrix, we're never saying, don't ever do anything else. Don't ever do any other therapeutic techniques, only do the matrix. We're not saying that at all. There's plenty, I think, of probably really great interventions that are specific, or were developed for PTSD and are helpful for trauma, that are perfectly usable here, even within the context of what we're doing. So even things like you'd have to be very delicate with it, but like doing some things with your imagery, like intentionally recalling that experience and going through it in different ways, slowing that fall down, or putting different things in the scenery around that. There's lots of different things that we can do mentally that can soften that experience up, but also emphasize that you do have some kind of ability to manipulate even your own thought process, your thinking, like your imagery of an experience, which then further indicates, oh, this is a cognitive experience that I'm responding to as if it was happening again, as if it was the real thing, right? And that's the cognitive diffusion that we're talking about in ACT. It's not just stepping away from your thoughts, it's also thinking, oh, this is me doing something under the influence of a thought as if it was a literal occurrence. And so I think there's a lot of cool techniques that you can pull in from other modalities that are perfectly reasonable to do in these contexts.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Is there a live question, or we'll go to another written one?
Let's do a written one, I guess. Let's see.
Maybe, Jacob, the questions regarding exposure are suitable now. There was a couple. like how you combine a gradual exposure with the matrix, or can you combine exposure work with the matrix? I remember some questions like this.
Yeah, there was a couple of questions about exposure work, and it's just like I was saying, we don't need to we don't need to have the matrix be the only thing that we're doing. We don't need the matrix to be in charge of all the other interventions, but we can use the matrix to help us, for example, at the very least, help us create hierarchies of exposure if we're doing like traditional exposure work with clients. The stuff that a client is putting maybe on the top left, like the things that I do to move away, and the stuff on the bottom left, that's all rich content that we can use to create a graduated exposure list if we want to. But also if we're doing exposure in an ACT informed way, then we can also bring in the stuff that's on the right-hand side of the matrix, which is the things that are important to us and the things that we value, to help us with that. Because in the, I guess, the ACT exposure world, you're not just tracking subjective units of distress, you're also tracking that willingness to do something if in the service of something that is important to you or that you value. In other words, you can do imaginal exposure to very aversive things, just kind of plain like normal, or you can do them in the context of imagining yourself doing something that's very aversive in the service of something that is important to you or a person that you really care about or love. How does that change or transform the experience? So there's lots of different ways we can just use the content of the matrix and pull it out, and then use whatever we traditionally think of as exposure, all those other techniques that we already know, and we're just kind of inserting that into that part of the work that we do.
And matrix work can be an exposure in itself, because we ask people to orient their attention to parts of their experience that they may not want to look at or may not use to look at. And we can see, I think, Jacob, you say again and again, what's happening now in the room. You can see that something is happening now in the room when we ask those matrix questions that is indicative of exposure in vivo now, not topographic exposure, but a functional exposure, helping clients to orient their attention to different aspects and layers of their experience.
Yep, and there's a lot of exposure built into ACT and just the traditional ACT methods and even the matrix on a small scale. But I think if you want more kind of insight into how exposure and ACT, or exposure and ACT can really go together, Mike Tuhig, the professor, that's his area of expertise. He doesn't do the matrix specifically, but he does ACT and exposure work all the time, and he researches that. So he's one of the authorities on that. Let's do another question. Yeah, actually, here's a good one, Lior. I think there was a couple of people who asked in the question box, which is trying to go deeper with some of the questions. How do we go deeper beyond the surface level with some of these different questions about who and what is important to you, what's showing up on the inside, and so forth? I know we kind of talked about that a little bit, you and I privately, but what are some of the ways that you help clients go deeper into their experience, Lior?
I think that firstly, I go with what with what interests me now. I'm not let myself stuck with the 4 questions alone. People, when I ask who and what is important to you, people say stuff that, one, I don't understand. So I ask again, trying to understand what do they mean when they say a nice career. I don't know, something that is very fuzzy, and I ask a lot of questions regarding relationship. I think this is the main way that I try to deepen my understanding of the stuff. How does it look with your kids, with your spouse, with your colleagues, with like trying to translate the answers that people give to what important to me, who is important to me, what do I do when when this stuff inside get hook me? How does it look in relationship, in your relationship with your with the people that surrounds you? So this is, I think, a lot of my questions go to that direction regarding interaction.
Yeah, exactly. And then I have various different versions of the matrix. I'm going to share one here. And this is one that just has additional questions that I've written on it. And so if you go to the bottom right, we see, who and what do I deeply value? Why? Why do I deeply value those things in people? Tell me more. If I knew I only had X number of sunsets left, X number of days to live, what things would get my attention? What is present in my life currently that is bringing me suffering? What is absent from my life that brings me suffering? In other words, what do I not have? Does this suffering make sense to me, given my life history? How am I responding to my inner experience? What is this response trying to achieve? Does this response make sense? What might move me toward more life rather than just away from pain? And with who? How? Where? When? Right? So these are some of those relationship questions that Lior is talking about. Who would be included in these aspects of your life? Where do they fit? Even in the like the bottom left, if we're talking about this internal experience is very uncomfortable. Who else in your life is sort of a part of that? In other words, you might have somebody who lives with you that you love, who is either impacted by that or not impacted at all because you don't share it with them, right? And what does it mean when you don't share your experience? How does that work for you with some of these other people that you love? So we can go deeper just by altering some of these questions and just by being curious about the other parts of the context in people's lives. So ways like that are usually how I go a little bit deeper. But like Lior said, it's just trying to use that curiosity to examine what else might be showing up, or who, where, when, getting more of the context and the environment into the picture.
And also the body, getting the body into the picture. Like it really looking for the vitality and survival maybe, but also what happens in your body when you do that and this and that. I also ask a lot of this. It's referring to the verbal Aikido of Kevin Polk. He has like 7 questions that elaborate on the matrix, and I think they are very informative and helping to like focusing more on behavior and getting a better view on what's really happening there. do you want to pick another question, Jacob?
Yeah, the question that I'm looking at is saying, how can I use the matrix on myself when I'm stuck in sessions? So I'm pulling something up on my end, but Lior, why don't you go ahead while I pull something up?
I think this question, it's a really nice question because it also reminds us that we and the client are like on the same boat. Yeah, we're not built differently. We have the same mechanism inside us, and we can and should, I think, use the matrix on ourselves. What's happening now in session when I'm doing this and that, when I'm saying this and that, when I'm behaving in a manner. Is it a vitality move by me or survival move by me when the client says to me like he's angry with me, or I'm not helping him, or he's stuck, or something is not going on as I wished for it? What's happening to me now? What's hooking me? How does my behavior look when I'm moving left or right? And it connects also to FAP, functional analytic psychotherapy conceptualization regarding like T1 and T2, the therapist movement towards or away, or doing the same stuff again and again when he's like hooked in the loop. And can I move from there? If I take the matrix and look at my behavior, can it help me to get unhooked and then move more freely in the direction of the therapist that I want to be in this moment for this specific client?
I can give you an example.
What are it?
I just wanted to say that I can give you an example really fresh from my clinic yesterday, really heroic example, but it's just like what you mentioned now.
Go for it.
I had a really tough, traumatic patient that she's really having, she's suicidal. And I asked her, she didn't want, but I asked her to bring some medication. She was trying to, let go. How do you say let go, Leo?
To
just sometimes words are
what?
Yes. So she's trying to accumulate it. Although, the medication her parents give, but eventually we are really honest with each other. So we are together like a year and a half. So she was telling me about this, and I said to her, really, I think this moment, this couple of days, I really ask you to bring it to my clinic. And she said, no. And I talked with her on the phone, and she was convinced to bring it to the clinic, which is a really, really an effortable behavior for her, because for her, the opportunity is really a relief. So she brought yesterday, and I told her that after she'll bring it, we will discuss it and we will talk about all the options. And she will be able to decide if she's going out of my clinic with the medication or not. This is really in my I felt like I do something that I really needed an effort to do that, even to give her the opportunity to leave the clinic with it. And I did something that I really surprised myself. At the beginning, I looked at the behavior of myself, and she said, no, I cannot leave it here. And I said, you know what? I think this moment I have to, you cannot choose. And I really don't like to say that to patients, but sometimes you have to. And it was really uncomfortable because, the choice, I also promised her the choice. So I decided to do a move that I was really curious what it will bring. And I'm very happy that I did that, but it took me a while, like 15 minutes before I was able to do that. And I took the box of the medication and said, you know what, you can have it. And she took the medication at the beginning, and she was throwing it to the table. She took it, instantly she took it, and then she threw it to the table because she saw I'm really going to give her to let go with the medication. But it was like less than a minute that she left the medication after she saw that I'm willing to give her that. And she changed her behavior and her mind immediately after. She took it again. Eventually, it was left in my clinic, but she couldn't admit it was a choice. She could not admit it was a choice. But for me, seeing her after she was the freedom to choose, that she put it back, it was it's a behavior that I was holding to.
So, Dalit, thank you for the example. Regardless of the consequence.
So I hope this is what I have in mind when you said what you said. So I don't know if it's
it's like a bold move of the therapist, but regardless of the consequence, I think what I take from your example is the seeing myself getting hooked and stuck, like lower left side, and using the matrix in order to widen my possibilities and my choices as a therapist. And I think what you say that this move also widened the choice of your client, but this is like, we cannot predict. It's this is the consequence. But what you did is like widening up your repertoire, your behavior repertoire.
Yeah, and that's a great example of getting stuck, or trying to kind of have to work it out live, in the session. You didn't have time to like, stop, pause everything and prepare yourself. But there are some times when you might know, like, for example, you're looking at your clients for the day, your calendar, and you think, oh, geez, I don't want to see this client at 4 p.m. today or whatever, because I just know I just can't, I've gotten stuck with him so many times in the past. So in situations like this, what I like to do is, before the session, I will do a matrix on myself. So I'll do something like, what's important to me about this client or working with this client? What's important to me about being a therapist? About to see a person who I find very challenging. And then I might look and say, what shows up inside of me when I think about working with this client, or what are some of the thoughts that I have, whatever. And then I think, how have I responded to those in the past? What are some ways that I tend, what are some actions I tend to do when I get stuck with a lot of those thoughts and feelings? And then I have a set of actions, which is usually freeze or do the same thing over and over in the session. And then on the other side, the toward or vitality side, upper right quadrant, I would ask myself, what are some actions that would move me toward the kind of therapist I want to be in this situation? What are some things that would give me a sense of vitality in that room or whatever? And then now I have a little bit of things to be aware of when I'm in the session. Then after the session too, I can, if I've had a challenging session with a client after the session, I can use the matrix to try to process out what happened. What was showing up for me in that room. And then I can sort out that experience onto the matrix. And then I can use that next time before that session with the same client. I can pull out the matrix I did at the end, and I can think, oh, geez, here's why I got stuck last time. Let me see if I can make it a point to try to do something differently in this session. Also, in relation to what Lior was saying, that kind of using that sort of FAP point of view, if I get stuck with a client and I don't know what to do and I can't figure it out in session, if I process it on the matrix on my end, the next time we meet, I can be open about that. And I can say, you know what, I was thinking about our session last week, and I really noticed myself getting kind of stuck in certain spots, or I noticed myself trying to do something and it wasn't really working very well for us. It wasn't working very well for me, and I could tell it wasn't maybe helping you in that moment. And I just want to acknowledge that and let you know that I'm aware of that. And maybe we can try doing something different today, and we can talk about it and see how it felt or whatever, right? So we can use the matrix to be more vulnerable and open and model some of that behavior for the clients that we're working with.
And I think, Jacob, what you say also brings me back to the repetitive nature of the matrix, because the repetitive nature of the matrix, when you do it again and again and again with yourself, before, after, and during sessions, it gives you a structure of investigation that I hope that my clients can get from the matrix as well, like a structure from which they can investigate their behavior. So the repetitiveness here is also part of the game, I think, part of this tool. I think we have time for one more. So if
Yep, that's what I was going to say. One more question, and then we'll wrap up for today.
I think if I have to choose from the list, maybe the question regarding case conceptualization, using the matrix as a case conceptualization tool. There were a couple of questions. Can it replace case conceptualization or substitute case conceptualization? And maybe Jacob, maybe you want to address it.
Sure. So yeah, the question is can we use the matrix for case conceptualization, in the first place? And that the answer is yes, you can. And that's what the matrix is. It's just a way of conceptualizing human experience, right? It's not the only way of doing it. It's just a way of doing it that we find to be helpful. Also, just as therapists, I find it to be helpful. So even if I, had a client that really just wasn't interested for some reason, I'm still using it in the background on my end. In other words, I'm looking at their behavior through the lens of the matrix. But I think the real value of using the matrix in session with a client, at least once, is you're conceptualizing what's going on for them together collaboratively. So it's not that you're meeting with the client and then after they leave, now you're in private, thinking about what's going on in that client's life. What is it that we need to focus on and change or whatever. You're not doing it privately outside of their awareness. You're doing it together in session on a piece of paper that they can look at and take home. And you're helping the client conceptualize their own experience of their life, which I think is super important. And we don't always do that with clients. So like in other therapies, the conceptualization happens entirely in private and the client doesn't have access to that. So this is a different way of working.
I think this is really the main issue with conceptualizing with the matrix, that it is transparent and it is a work that you do together and not alone. And then it becomes like very validating and making and like negotiating the conceptualization, making it more and more precise. And I think it really affects good on the working alliance with the client. Getting in agreeing regarding the goals of therapy, the method of therapy, and making positive connection with the client, because we do it together and not me doing it behind the curtains, behind the scene, and not involving the client in this process. And
I guess importantly, just like all case conceptualization, it's evolving. It continues as the work with the client continues. So if you are doing multiple matrices with the client, I put those in the file. And sometimes if I have a matrix, for a session, sometimes I just look at that. I don't even need the case note. I'll write a case note in words, but I don't even need to look at that because I just look at the matrix and I get a good sense of where we're at and what we did last time in session and things like that. So I use those in the file, and it's an ongoing progression. So I'm not just referencing the very first matrix we did with the client. That's another question that was asked. Do we just look at the first one, or do we update it? And yes, we're updating it all the time.
Okay, I think we got to the end of our session.
Well, thank you. Yeah, well, thank you very much, everybody. This is obviously kind of a new thing that we're trying to do here, and I hope that at least some of your questions were answered satisfactorily. I think that the two main books on the matrix, which the first one is just called the ACT Matrix, I think it's blue, and then there's the cream colored one, brown, which is the Essential Guide to the ACT Matrix, are really good. Also, you can look at our websites, or the website that I have, which is actmatrix.com. And then Lior has, what is yours called, Lior?
I have like an online course that I think some of you took. It's matrix.act, and I don't know how you say dash.
Yeah, dash.
il.org.
If you want to learn more, obviously you can email both of us with any other questions that you have. But I appreciate your attendance. Thank you guys very much. And stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jake.
Bye.
Thank you.